Hey guys, you're here with Fiddle and Mike once again. This week we're going to talk about mandolin basics. Got my trusty Mando here, and basic technique is a really important thing to master if you want to get good tone out of your instrument, if you want to play free from pain and without limits. Bad technique and getting the bad habits early, those can really hold you back, and you'll hit a wall really quickly where you can't pick very fast, you can't play very long because your hand is hurting, or even if it's not causing you pain, you just can't go that fast because you've never learned how to do things like hold the pick properly, move your arm in the pick motion properly, or hold the mandolin in the right way. So we're going to go through those things right now so that when we go through all of our other mandolin lessons, you can play without limits and without pain. So the first thing we're going to look at is, how do you hold the mandolin? Where do you put it? Well, if you're seated, which we are now, you want to put the mandolin just right in your lap, square center in your lap. You don't want to put it on your right leg or your left leg. As you get more familiar with it, this isn't quite so important. You play over here, you play over here. It's going to be okay, but for now, this is our ground zero, right in the middle of the lap there. And you want the mandolin to be at about a 45-degree angle. And again, as you're playing, you may lean over, you might get into it, and that's okay. But for now, I want to teach you a good spot to be at. And the reason this is a good spot to be is because it will get you in a good habit in terms of how you hold the neck of the mandolin with your left hand and how you pick with your right hand. Once you get those things down with this form, then you can sort of mess around with it because you won't lose the left and the right hand. But for now, we're going to get this positioning proper, right in the middle, about 45 degrees. Some players, I know Mike Marshall believes in this a lot, he likes to put his left foot up a little bit. He puts it on his case. Something I do sometimes, I take my right foot and sort of roll it to the side and I put my left foot on top of it, and that props it up a little bit, and that just makes it easier to keep this at a nice 45-degree angle. The next thing we're going to look at is how our left hand holds the mandolin. Okay, now our left hand, we want the neck of the mandolin to be hitting between our joint of our first finger on the knuckle and then the first joint. So our knuckle and our first joint, that between there is right where the mandolin goes. Okay, now obviously we don't play like this, turn our hand just a little bit so that our fingers can get on there. Now our thumb, where does that go? We do not want it hanging over like crazy like this. The pad of the thumb, we call it the pad, it's just the front part between the tip and the first joint there. We want that just to be lightly touching the top of the mandolin neck. Okay, so we got between the knuckle and the first joint of the first finger on one side, and we got the pad of the thumb placed lightly on the other. Okay, now as you'll notice, the knuckle of your first finger is going to be kind of on the underside of the neck here. Okay, that's going to help you create your counter pressure. Now just to think about that a little bit, whenever you're playing any notes, your fingers are pressing down on the strings and pressing down on the instrument. Now, in order to get some sound and for that to work, there has to be some counter pressure, something pressing against the neck, so that instead of you just pressing on the neck and it going like this, you're providing some counter pressure so the strings go down to the neck and the neck stays put. That counter pressure comes from that knuckle joint of your first finger, and that just happens naturally. You don't have to think about it. When you're pressing down with your finger, that knuckle joint is going to be right there, stuck behind the neck, providing that counter pressure. Now when you're doing chords, that's a little different because your left hand is going to roll around and you're going to have the thumb, the pad of your thumb is going to be against the back of the neck. And then your left hand is going to be, the wrist is going to be down a little bit more so you can do those 4-string mandolin chords. That's for a lot of like the jazz chords. You won't always be in that situation. Sometimes when you're doing mandolin, bluegrass chords, you can keep your hand in the regular picking formation. You can do a lot of those chords just fine. But when you're doing some of those complicated jazz 4-string chords, you want to roll your hand a little bit and have the thumb in the back. Okay? But it's really important that when you're picking, you're not in that position because that makes it really hard and cumbersome to try and do picking with your fingers when your thumb is stuck in the back like that and your wrist is down. That's not for picking, that's just for doing some of the jazz stuff. Okay, and even then you don't want it to be too far down when you're doing the chords. You just want to roll just a little bit so that your fingers are able to reach. All right, now moving on to our right hand. This is probably the most important part of the instrument, is the pick. This is where your tone comes from. This is where your timing comes from. Really, this is the voice, your musical voice when you play mandolin. Okay, and the first thing to talk about is the pick. What kind of pick do you use? Well, in the old days, a lot of the players used tortoiseshell picks. Some people, a lot of the guys still do, and this is something that's really common in bluegrass, particularly in guitar. But in mandolin, pretty much all mandolin players use these wider picks. They're triangular shaped picks. They're a little bit wider with not a very pointy edges. They're sort of wider edges. A little bit more sloped instead of pointy, like those Dunlop guitar picks you might have seen. And you want a harder type of pick. You don't want a soft pick that's going to bend a lot. You want a nice, thick, hard pick. And that's why people use tortoiseshell so much, because that's a really, really hard substance and it got a great tone. Of course, I think tortoiseshell is now illegal, so you can't really get real tortoiseshell anymore. You can get fake tortoiseshell, those are okay. The best thing to do, I think, is get a Wiegand pick. I really like Wiegand picks. They're made out of plastic. They're lightweight. They're hard. They have a nice bevel to their edges. And of course, they have all the different types of picks at Wiegand, but the mandolin picks are absolutely great. Blue chip picks also make a good mandolin pick. But I like the Wiegand. If you want to try the faux tortoiseshell, those are pretty good too. They just don't last as long, and you really have to polish them the way you like them. So there's a little bit more going into that. You actually have to sort of polish and bevel it yourself to get that shape. Wiegand has a nice built-in shape, so I like the Wiegand pick. The next thing, once you have the pick that you like, that nice hard pick, is you need to hold it right. Okay, now a lot of players do it a lot of different ways, and there's no one hard and fast rule. So I want to say right at the beginning, this is not a rule. You don't have to do it this way. The way I'm going to show you is simply the way that most of the pro pickers do it. And like the really, really good players, I would say, hold to these principles. They're not really rules, they're principles. And I'm going to show that to you right now. But some players, they hold it right at the end, and they have their fingers out, and they do a lot of wrists or a lot of fingers. And that works for some people, but I would say in most cases, you don't want to do that. What you want to do is you want to take your pick, your nice wide pick, and you want to take your finger. I want you to put your first finger out like this, and just sort of hold it like that, like you're pointing, but sort of underhand. You want to take your pick and take the wide end of it and do it almost parallel to your finger between the tip and the first joint. Just put that pick right there. And then I want you to take the tip of the corner of the pick that's by the tip of your finger, and I want you to roll that out just a little bit. Okay. And then I want you to just put your thumb down on it like that. So how that's going to be is you're going to have the pointy end of the pick just to the end away from you, from your finger. So you're not actually, the pick is not pointing perpendicular away from your first finger. It's actually right near the tip of your first finger. Your thumb just comes down on top of that, and that's the pad of your thumb. The full pad of your thumb is on top of that pick. Okay, so if you guys can see that, the way I'm holding it. Okay, that's how you want to do it. Now that you got your pick placed just right, how do you do the pick stroke? Let's break it down. There's 3 different components to a pick stroke. And that really comes from the 3 different components of your arm. You got your fingers, which is primarily your first finger and your thumb. Okay, and you got finger movements that you can do. You have your wrist. You can do the wrist movements. And you have your forearm. You can do forearm movements. Good picker is going to incorporate all 3 movements. Now, like I said, some choose to do more fingers, some like to do more forearm. The way I'm going to show you incorporates all 3. You really have to incorporate all 3 because you're never going to hold anything perfectly rigid, and that'll create tension and pain and really create limits. So you have to be flexible all up and down your arm. The way I'm going to show you is primarily forearm driven. All right. Now the main power of your stroke is going to be the forearm, this up and down motion, and that just makes sense. Your strongest muscles in your forearm. It's easy for you to go up and down and drive right through the string, no problem. If you have to play a pick stroke with your fingers, that's kind of, you don't have very big muscles in your thumbs. You don't lift do bench press with your thumbs. You do it with your arms. Okay, so your arms are going to be the main motion. So I want you to practice that with me right now. Just go up and down. Don't move your wrist or your fingers very much. Just up and down, okay? Now then, to incorporate your wrist, you want to keep things flexible. Now, even though your forearm is the driving force, your wrist has got to be responsive to that. It's got to be sort of reflexive. So when you're going up with your forearm, your wrist is going to bend a little bit, meaning it's just going to drag. So like you're leading with the top of your forearm near your wrist, and your hand just sort of follows just a little bit behind. Okay? And you can see, it's nice and flexible looking. This is something you want to master first. So get your picks out and start doing this. Okay? Obviously you're never going to pick with this giant motion. We're doing exaggerated motions right now. So up and down, leading with the top of your forearm, your wrist, and letting your hand follow. Okay? Now you may have noticed that your fingers naturally respond a little bit. Just in terms of the way when your hand is leading, your fingers just sort of respond by going up and down just a little bit. And that's all you want. It's your forearm that's the engine, and your wrist and your fingers are like in the driver's seat. They're doing all the precision elements. Your forearm is getting you up and down on the string, but it's your fingers that are really going to make those small adjustments. But that's all they are, it's just adjustments. Okay? So now that you got this, I want you to bring it to the string. And if you look at the way that we pick on the string, it's picking the D string now. D. It's slightly parabolic. The pick, obviously, you're not going up and down on a single plane, because then you'd just be hitting all the strings at once. You need to be able to go in, down a little bit, and then out again. It's a parabola. Okay, like a bowl. That's the big movement. Now obviously you want to practice that and then get it smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller until you're hardly moving anything at all.